Ever wondered what makes DC's ultimate villain, Darkseid, so utterly terrifying? I mean, sure, he seems intimidating with his hulking physique and the ability to turn his foes into nothing, but the true source of his powers is the cosmic and chilling Omega effect. Its power is arguably limitless, making Darkseid one of the most terrifying baddies. Let's talk all about it, because today, we're unraveling the mysteries behind Darkseid's signature power, exploring its origins and its devastating abilities. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. What is the Omega effect? The Omega effect is a source of energy that the Lord of Apocalypse, Darkseid, wields. It's basically Darkseid's signature power, and one of the most terrifying powers possessed by any character in the DC universe. Through the Omega effect, Darkseid gets his most devastating abilities. One of the most prominent features of the Omega effect is that it allows Darkseid to shoot bioelectric beams from his eyes, known as Omega beams. These laser beams can unerringly track their targets no matter where they go, and when they hit, you better watch out. They can do anything from disintegrating people completely, teleporting them across dimensions, or even erasing them from existence. Interestingly, anything that Darkseid disintegrates with the Omega effect, he can recreate it with just a thought. Therefore, this tactic is frequently used as a method of punishment for those whom Darkseid considers too useful to kill outright. If we were to draw a parallel with the Marvel universe, Omega effect is closest to the Odin Force. But in fact, it might be much more powerful and versatile than Odin Force or Thor Force. The beams powered from the Omega effect are made of entropy, so Darkseid can actually do pretty much anything using them. No mortal can survive the Omega effect, but in the DC universe, the only two characters who are known to dodge the Omega effect are Superman and Doomsday. This doesn't mean that Superman and Doomsday are too powerful for the Omega effect. In reality, Omega effect can literally destroy anyone, but fans speculate that Superman might just be protected by plot armor, or that Darkseid might be too busy ruling Apocalypse and fighting the gods of New Genesis to care. Also, Darkseid never really seems to be going all out with the Omega effect. However, Darkseid is not the only one who can wield the powers from the Omega effect. His father, Yuga Khan, is also known to emit Omega beams, which are much more powerful than those of Darkseid. Even Grail, the daughter of Darkseid, inherits this power and even destroys Wonder Woman's Amazonian bracelet using it. The origin of the Omega effect and how Darkseid gained it. So, how did Darkseid get his hands on the Omega effect? The Omega effect has always existed in the Fourth World and was contained within the Infinity Pit. It's tied to the Source, and it's a component of the entropy. Think of the Source as the fundamental, originating consciousness and energy of the entire DC multiverse. It's basically where everything comes from. Now, the Source, in its ultimate nature, has dual aspects: creation and destruction, order and chaos, life and anti-life. While the Source itself is the wellspring of all things, the Omega effect represents its destructive and entropic side. But even though most new gods couldn't handle that amount of power, Darkseid and his family were obsessed with it. Before he was the tyrannical ruler that all of us DC fans know him as, Darkseid was Prince Euxus, the younger son of Yuga Khan and Hegra. He was quite ambitious from a pretty young age and wanted the throne of Apocalypse for himself, supplanting his brother Drax. Soon after Yuga was lost in the Source Wall, Darkseid met Darkseid, one of his most trusted allies, and together they set out to defeat Drax. At that point, Drax was trying to claim this ancient power of the Omega effect by connecting with the Omega realm to solidify his rule and establish himself as the true heir. Drax even had a special suit made, which was later revealed was a trap to boil Drax in Omega Force energy. Euxus interrupted Drax's attempts in a ruthless move by pretending to help him and usurped the Omega Force for himself, supposedly killing Drax in the process. This transformed Euxus as his appearance changed, and a chrysalis formed around his body. This is when he took on the moniker of Darkseid and became the god of tyranny, wielding the Omega effect. Drax was the much more peaceful of the two brothers, so the outcome truly pleased their mother Hegra, who always favored Euxus' ruthlessness. The powers and abilities granted by the Omega effect. Now that we've explored what the Omega effect is and where it came from, let's get into the nitty-gritty of what it lets its bearers do. To put it simply, it does a lot, and it makes Darkseid ridiculously powerful. The Omega effect is the core from which all of Darkseid's powers arise. First and foremost, and probably the most popular, is that it grants the ability to shoot Omega beams from the eyes. The shooting of Omega beams isn't just some relentless attack. It locks the target and disintegrates it into nothingness. Surprisingly, they can also resurrect targets. Like we mentioned before, before. Yeah, Darkseid can bring people back to life, though usually for his own nefarious purposes, like torturing them further. Apart from erasing the victims from the universe, these beams can also teleport people or objects across space, time, and dimensions. Darkseid seems to have complete control over the beams, since he doesn't just shoot them in a straight line, but can also bend, twist, or curve the beams according to his will. The Omega effect also allows Darkseid to manipulate reality and time on a grand scale, so he can literally reshape environments or change the physical properties of things, or even send people back through time. Through the Omega effect, he can also project energy from his hands in the form of blasts, though these energy blasts are nowhere near as versatile as the ones he shoots from his eyes. The Omega effect also allows Darkseid to create as many avatars as he likes and project them anywhere he wants, though these avatars are much weaker than Darkseid himself. The most vicious and cruelest of powers granted by the Omega effect is Omega Sanction, which enables Darkseid to bestow a fate upon his victims worse than death. Omega Sanction traps the target's consciousness in an endless cycle of misery, and we'll talk about its psychological torture more elaborately later. Darkseid can also bestow some of his powers to his lesser subjects if he pleases. For example, Dr. Bedlam, Mantis, Calabac, or Mary Marvel. This transfer of power either enhances the powers that his subjects already possess, or grants them entirely new abilities. How the Omega Beams work. Darkseid's signature attack. The Omega Beams, Darkseid's signature attack, are concentrated blasts of energy that he fires directly from his eyes, precisely. It appears like a red glow in his eyes and is considered to be unavoidable since he can bend the beams as per his will in any direction, after locking onto the target. So technically the direction of the beams can be changed mid-air and they can curve around obstacles to track and hit the target, though there are some discrepancies. While these beams have given even Flash, one of the fastest heroes, a great amount of trouble, in one instance, Batman is known to dodge these beams by redirecting them through sheer tactical brilliance, which even impressed Darkseid. However, the details of Batman's escape are quite complicated. In other words, the Omega Beams are inescapable and a total wipeout, until and unless the writer wants them to be. The key to the Omega Beams is Darkseid's will. It's like he commands them, so what the beams will do, whether erase existence, teleport, banish to a different reality, resurrect, or torture, depends entirely on what Darkseid wants them to do. When these beams erase something or someone, they're not just destroyed, even their past and their other multiversal versions are erased, as if they never existed in the first place. The Omega Beams also recently got a major power update in the All-In Special No. 1, wherein they can erase people from the multiverse in a blink. Essentially, the Omega Beams are a direct manifestation of Darkseid's cosmic power and his absolute control over life and death and everything in between. The Omega Sanction. Fate worse than death. What's more chilling and painful than being completely erased from existence? Being in an endless cycle of lives that are progressively worse than death. That's exactly what Omega Sanction is, a spiritual purgatory that Darkseid can trap his victims in through the Omega Beams. It's considered to be a fate worse than death, for a very good reason. The Omega Sanction subjects its victims to countless alternate lives, one after another, and each more agonizing than the previous. The deeper the victim goes into the trap, the more hopeless and meaningless their existence becomes, thus being much more torturous than a quick death. When Batman was hit by Omega Sanction in the final crisis, everyone assumes that Batman was dead, but in reality, he was caught in an endless loop of agony. During this, he experienced being a caveman, a cowboy, and even a detective in a noir setting. The incredible thing is that despite the mind-bending torment, Batman's indomitable will and detective skills allowed him to subtly realize something was wrong. In each life, he picked up on inconsistencies, tried to find patterns, and never truly gave up on trying to understand his situation. Even though he couldn't physically escape, his mind resisted being fully broken, and was eventually able to escape with the Justice League's intervention. The same power, when inflicted upon Mr. Miracle, trapped him in several lives until he went completely insane. What makes this Omega Sanction so cruel is that it's not just about physical pain, it's about annihilating people's will and spirit. Limits and weaknesses of the Omega effect. Even something as incredibly potent as the Omega effect isn't entirely without limits. It's the ultimate power, so it's not like someone can block it with a regular shield, but there have been several instances where people have stood against it. It's important to remember that the Omega effect is connected to the source and tied to the will of Darkseid, so its effectiveness and strength fluctuate based on how focused Darkseid is, or whether he's in his original physical form or an avatar. Generally, the avatar's powers are much weaker. Theoretically speaking, if Darkseid's connection to the source is somehow interrupted, it could potentially have a negative impact on his power too. It's nearly impossible for anyone to tank a direct hit from Omega Beams, but some superhuman characters with near invulnerability have managed to survive them. Superman, for example, was hit by it, and despite being momentarily incapacitated, survived the attack and even deflected them back at Darkseid himself. This brings to light one of the greatest weaknesses of the Omega effect, that it can backfire upon its bearer. To elaborate, during a battle on Apokolips, Superman covers Darkseid's eyes, thus blocking his sight, which causes causes the Omega Beam to backfire and strike himself in the back. In another instance, when the Justice League was battling against Darkseid, Green Lantern suddenly had the idea to blind him so as to disrupt the Omega Beams. Superman, being the most powerful of them all, burns Darkseid's eyes with his heat vision and momentarily immobilizes him. Superman was not the only being surviving the Omega effect. Doomsday also had famously shrugged these beams off, even though he was not left unscathed. On many occasions, Flash has also outrun these beams, so it goes on to show that the Omega effect might not be as inescapable as it seems. So the limitation of the Omega effect often comes down to the truly exceptional nature of Darkseid's most powerful foes or unique narrative circumstances. However, with the new rebooted ability of the Omega effect to destroy the multiverse, things may change. The Omega Effect in major comic storylines. The Omega Effect is a central force in many of Darkseid's most significant comic storylines, so here are some key comic arcs for you. Darkseid first appeared as a cameo in Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen number 134, as a big boss whom all the other villains reported to, but it truly all began in Jack Kirby's Fourth World Saga. However, in the first issue of New Gods, he doesn't seem to do much. These early storylines were just set up to show how formidable he was, that even without doing anything, and simply chilling in a chair, he could make other supervillains bow down to him. Darkseid's origin story, however, has been depicted in 1997's Jack Kirby's Fourth World, number 2 through 5. These are the issues that narrate the story of Uxas' conflict with his brother and how he became Darkseid. The next major portrayal of the powers of the Omega Effect was in number 1 through 7 of Final Crisis, with the Omega Sanction's use on Batman being a central plot point, particularly around Final Crisis number 6. However, the most recent issues of Justice League number 40 through 50 fundamentally changed the understanding of Omega Effect's cosmic scope. Here, the Omega Effect is shown to be a fundamental force in the multiverse. When Darkseid dies, his Omega Effect is unleashed, changing several Justice League members into new gods with Darkseid-like powers. For example, Batman becomes the god of knowledge, and Flash becomes the god of death. Marvelous verdict, and that brings us to the end of our exploration. The Omega Effect's role in the DC Universe began as Prince Uxas' desperate grab for the Throne of Apocalypse, but ultimately it shaped his legacy as one of the most powerful beings and ultimate tyrant. Whether it's through the raw force of its beams or the insidious torment of the Omega Sanction, this power is a testament to why Darkseid is one of DC's most formidable villains. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone!